You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over into Dr. Osborne's zone. So I'd really just love to start with just a natural, casual conversation about your story and how you really got into mold as a practicing doctor. So let me preface the question this way. Before you experienced mold, were you treating mold? Were you seeing people with mold illness that you were treating?
I almost certainly was, but I didn't recognize it until I had the experience myself. So I thought back on some patients from when I had my family practice. But no, I had no ability to treat mold patients because I had never been taught anything about it. So it was all a very steep learning curve for
So
me.
nothing in your medical curriculum or history or medical school really ever prepared you for mold?
Nope. Maybe some hay fever, allergies, things like that, but not for the extent of what we see in our mold exposed patients. Absolutely no preparation for that.
And so would you just say that that's a big glaring hole in training in today's day and age?
It would. When I had my training, absolutely, I would say that was a big hole. I cannot speak to what medical students are being taught or other healthcare, trainees are being taught currently, but I I didn't have any experience with it and didn't even know where to look initially when I went through this in 2006.
So tell me a little bit about how you stumbled into it. I know you have a strong story of exposure.
Yeah, it was around May of 2005. I felt a little off and had a sore throat and took my temperature, and it was about 101.5. Then I started to pay attention to that. And since that's a fever of unknown origin, I worked with infectious disease specialists, ultimately saw about 18 different specialists because mold illness affects the whole body. And so this started. Other family members had symptoms, and I was hit the hardest because I had exposure both at home and at work, and I didn't know that. So we had our daughter was 5, and she would get fevers, but I was completely at a loss for what was causing this. I had read everything that was available to read at the time. We were searching down, rare viruses, and I had a bone marrow biopsy. Cancer was continually being evaluated and rolled out. I had a dozen CAT scans, about 3 MRIs, and 2 hospitalizations, and really was not any closer to figuring anything out. It actually, the moment it became clear was a day when we pushed a bookshelf to the side and saw a big black splotch behind it. And that was the beginning of us getting better. So that was the moment where we knew that we'd had mold exposure and started to learn initially for the health of myself and my family, eventually became trained, and now I get to take care of patients who are in similarly stuck situations where nobody knows what's going on with them. They haven't had a lot of satisfaction from traditional evaluations and treatments. And it would be great if, with this documentary or whatever you're doing, if we could pop this on people's radar a lot sooner. That's clinicians and patients.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What would you say? I'd like to know a little bit more about the symptoms that you started having. You mentioned fever, but could you be more detailed about some of the earlier onset symptoms that you were experiencing that might also help patients who or people who aren't aware even of the potential possibility of what the symptoms of mold exposure might be?
Oh, absolutely. First off, I'm going to say it's human nature to just suck things up and try and keep going. That's just what we do until we can't anymore for most people. So, what I was experiencing, vertigo, really pronounced. When I dictated at the end of the day, I had to close my eyes because it was um, I couldn't focus, I couldn't look and dictate. That was worked up extensively. Really bad muscle aches at the end of a day, just extremely sore. Digestive symptoms, heartburn, constipation, fatigue, which I attributed to the fevers, but it could be very hard for me to function. Gosh, oh, neuropathy symptoms. I had neuropathy symptoms. I had a skin lesion that developed and had it biopsied, and it was identified as leukocytoclastic vasculitis, which is just weird. It That particular skin biopsy was later tested and was found to have very high levels of ochratoxin and some aflatoxin, but that was about a year later. So, gosh, I'm trying to remember. Practically every organ system was affected during the time I went through that. And I had no way of figuring out how to get out of it. And I think because I had the fevers, they could measure that objectively. I had an extremely extensive workup. Not everybody has that experience. It really depends on how they present. So fevers are actually not very common, as it turns out. I don't see it that often. Intermittent, but not like I had daily for 10 months. So, it, oh, breathing, respiratory symptoms, really hard time breathing. Had the full pulmonary workup, even had a lung biopsy. And tried the normal treatments, but they didn't help, normal inhalers and things. Sinus symptoms, pretty much name an organ system, and something was going on. The skin burning without a rash, that was definitely something unusual. And taste changes, just a normal plain food item would taste really off. Those are things I remember experiencing.
And you had this amazing team of doctors, throwing every kind of test and, medical diagnostic tool at you. Was there at any point in any of that medical workup any insight or clue in rather to the fact that you were being mold poisoned?
Not a clue or a mention from any of the treating doctors. I was starting to hear from friends or about another physician who'd had a patient who had mold exposure. And it was just part of the many things. This was the last month or two before we figured it out. But of the actual treating physicians and even the way I had looked at it, I had explored so many other things before thinking about mold. I do want to acknowledge, though, once I figured it out, one of the people I was seeing for just general muscle and joint issues was a rheumatologist. And he must have jumped 3 feet in the air for joy when I told him it was mold, because he'd had families with this and they got better. And it was exciting. to know that, this wasn't going to be the rest of my life. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't me. And, so when we finally figured it out, that was very exciting, but it is important for people to know some things get better immediately when you leave. But if you've been in a moldy environment, your body has changed and it takes time. So, I encourage my patients, if they're unclear, if their environments are bothering them, to get away for 2 weeks to, find the most healthy place they can find and not bring stuff with them and see how they feel. So that's important. And with re-exposure, people can get very sick. I inadvertently got away for 2.5 weeks, and I don't mean inadvertently, but unknowingly left a moldy house. And then when I returned to it, things got bad. That was the first hospitalization. But during the 2.5 weeks I was gone, within a day, I felt normal. It was over. Who knows what this was? It doesn't matter. And then with return to the home, really, really did not feel well. But it took me another 6 months to realize the reason for that, because it took another 6 months to discover the mold.
Yeah, it's always easier to look at it hindsight than it is, than it is when you're in it. My wife had a similar experience with mold that you did in terms of symptoms. She actually ran a fever for 18 days solid.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after we had returned from a vacation, so we thought maybe she got an infection. Um, but it ended up being that when we returned from vacation, we had family coming into town. And so she was wiping, there was a haze on our countertops and on our cabinets, and didn't realize it was mold at the time. We just thought it was just dirty. And so she had spent several hours wiping that mold up, breathing it in, being exposed
Mm-hmm.
massively. And then for
Yeah.
8 days, she had a fever afterwards. So
Yep. I've had some histories of people like that where it's a very intense, acute exposure and they can get really, really sick.
you had mentioned in your story, I read your story, that you felt better walking on the beach than you did lying in your own bed.
Absolutely.
I, I,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I point that out because a lot of people, what you just said, which is, if you go away and you feel better, or if you're feeling bad, maybe even attempt to go away from your home. What we have seen since COVID, what I have, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. During COVID, all the hotels were shut down and nobody was running the HVAC systems were not in operation in order to save money, and so a lot of these buildings became water damage through moisture vapor, and many of them now are contaminated with mold. And so we've seen this where people try to get out of their houses and they end up going from one source of mold to another source of mold, and
Yeah.
then they don't get better, and then they
Mm-hmm.
get, obviously get frustrated. But you were on the beach, like outside in the fresh air, versus maybe staying put and watching TV in a moldy hotel room, right?
Yeah. Yeah. At I lived near the beach at the time, and that was a natural thing. I would walk the dog on the beach, and it would surprise me that, I could go from being completely wiped out to, being able to go out there and walk and enjoy myself. And the hotel situation is tricky. Ideally, people would find an outdoor environment, a camping type situation as their trial to see, if the home is a problem. Because, yes, people can go from one moldy environment to the other. The hotel situation you described sounds like it would be very problematic in places with humid conditions. It might not be as big of an issue, in places where the AC running continually isn't essential. So hotels are a reasonable option for people usually, but you can never guarantee an environment. A different environment is healthy. You do the best you can, and you try not to bring your personal items with you, because then you're physically bringing the problem with you, so you won't learn anything. And even if the other building isn't perfect, there's a good chance that it will not bother you as much as the exact mix that you had been exposed to and been reacting to. So it can still be informational. Ideally, we would all live and spend our time in healthy environments all the time, but we do not have perfection in the indoor and outdoor environment. So we have to kind of work with what can you do to find out. And if I can get people to do that, I don't have to do much in terms of them deciding that they want to live somewhere else, or, so that's the useful part of having that trial away. Because, it happened to me, but I didn't realize it at the time. But if you actually go from how horrible you're feeling and then, feel a lot better, you don't really want to go back to that life. And, at least it's informative and motivating for people.
Yeah, absolutely. What kind of time frame? I know it's probably different for everyone in your experience. It is in mine. What kind of time frame do you generally recommend? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? And do you have people that, even being in a great place that's mold free, still really struggle? Like it's not long enough for them to be out of it?
Yeah. I usually ask for 2 weeks. It can take longer for people who've been heavily exposed for a long time. Usually something will be noticeable within a few days. Not perfection, but not that same oppressive malaise that you were, potentially feeling in a moldy home. And um, you're looking for some improvement, some change when the person's away. If absolutely nothing happens during that 2 weeks, they feel exactly the same, then it gets trickier to sort out. It doesn't necessarily mean that their house isn't a problem. It's just, it's a different clinical situation. If people start to feel better, then you have a really good clue. And, because in reality, I'll treat anybody regardless of what situation they're in, but it's a real uphill battle if they're still in a moldy environment or an unhealthy environment of any sort, because, the treatments, you're just basically, trying to counter the effects of the moldy or otherwise unhealthy home.
Yeah, I see the same thing. It's typically, if they're in it and they're in it bad, no matter what we try to do, it's fruitless in terms of any kind of real super helpful comeback for their health.
Yeah, that's why if you can really get them to do a trial away, um, it's really useful. Because they experience it for themselves. But again, there's circumstances, financial, family, personality, where not everybody takes that route. I
Yeah,
encourage it, but you have to work with people where they are and who they are.
yeah, for sure, absolutely. I've experienced exactly the same. Um, so we can get out of the mold. We can do a trial if we suspect mold. We can get out of the house for a few weeks, ideally in an open air environment where we can really take advantage of fresh air and Mother Nature's
Mhm.
cleansing power. But um, what would you suggest? So there are a number of different methodologies that have been evolved and developed over the last several years, and so I would ask you kind of a two-part question here. Number one, if we're talking about investigating a person for mold poisoning or mycotoxicosis, what kinds of laboratory technologies have you found in your practice to be very helpful in kind of concretely solidifying or at least building a case for that person that mold is a likely culprit of their illness?
So every lab has a limitation. Every lab has false negative and false positives. I am always the most interested in knowing the clinical history and the environmental history. If they were clearly in a severely water damaged building, that is important. The tests that are more useful for, making a link include urine mycotoxin testing, which can absolutely have false negatives, right off out of the gate. But, it's urine. So the person has to have been able to get the toxin into the urine for it to be measurable. People who have been exposed for a while are often glutathione depleted, and they have a body burden of mycotoxins, but we can't measure it in the urine because they can't get it that far. Mold antibodies are also interesting to me, and not just IgE, but the IgGs. They have Stachybotrys, IgG, IgA, IgM. Sometimes I see that be positive. Again, antibodies are just going to tell you that you've been exposed at some point, or if it's an IgE, that you have a type 1 allergy. But I used to do, when I had an in-office practice, nasal fungal cultures. The hospital lab where I was really good at letting those grow out. So that gave me, a piece of information for treatment. I will always get complete labs, including detailed thyroid labs. Vitamin D levels are low very frequently. ANAs are positive very frequently, usually at under 1 to 160 titer for, just mold exposure. That was one of the things that elevated for me up to 1 to 320, and then is totally normal now. So I will get CBC iron studies, because that can be in the mix if somebody's iron stores are low. Nutritional panel, a complete nutritional panel through a specialty lab. I don't know if I can say it, but we all have our choices. That's super useful. Oxidative stress markers, lipid peroxides, 8-deoxyguanosine, very interesting. I used to get C4A and TGF beta 1, and then there was a period where the labs just wouldn't do it. So I've kind of got out of the habit of that. But that was also interesting as a, connection to exposure. And then neurocognitive testing. Again, when I had an in-office practice, I would do Dr. Kate Kilburn's neurotest profile, and that was very interesting too.
So kind of putting all the pieces together, some tests more direct, some a little less direct, but also giving you insight about the overall status of the patient and their inflammatory response, and how you might use other tools to help with that along their journey. Fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah, because you can get people away from the mold, but restoring what was depleted during the time of exposure is essential for them to regain their best health.
Yeah, I always say what caused your illness is maybe not what's always perpetuating it, because the damage that was done to get there can sometimes linger even after the exposure ends.
Oh yeah, yeah, and working through, you know, getting that corrected is really kind of the key. And, I don't know if you use the Dr. Bill Ray's sort of rain barrel approach, total load approach to exposure, but everything kind of fills the rain barrel and people don't necessarily notice as it's filling until they're overflowing. So, and that could be, toxin, stress, illness, everything kind of, fills it up. And our body is usually correcting that. My goal is to get people low enough from the top of their rain barrel so they can absorb the things that cannot be helped. In reality, we will have exposures that are unavoidable. Something happens. So if you can, get them working better, get glutathione replaced, I use binders. I like activated charcoal if they've had a mycotoxin exposure. And if they have a reserve, then if they have future exposures, they'll still feel it, but it'll be so much easier to recover. So, that's really my goal. You don't expect people to reach perfection and never feel bad again in their lives. That's not how it works. But they're mostly going to feel good. And if something happens, it's easy enough to figure out what to do. That's really my goal.
Yeah, they become resilient enough to handle the day-to-day minutia that we're all exposed to and not just crushed by small things.
That's really I will point that out. I don't know if you've seen this too, but to me, it's really important for people to understand that nothing in the human body just gets linearly better. It's always up and down. Yeah. But I'm looking for trending better, not the ups and downs, because those are unavoidable.
So part two of that question. So I asked you what tools you found helpful for identifying the potential for somebody being in mold. What tools do you recommend? And I know you're not a mold inspector or remediator, but what things do you recommend that they look for or seek out in a mold inspection? What kinds of tests or tools would you say are helpful, and what kinds would you say are potentially misleading?
Great question. First off, the World Health Organization, when they did their extensive review on dampness, looked into testing also. That was in 2009. We were expecting to get an update about 10 years later. I don't think we're going to get one because of COVID and other issues, but they defined damp or moist buildings as known history of water damage or leaking, visible mold, condensation, or musty and moldy smells. So any of those entered a study, into their analysis. They also looked at air samples, and they commented that it would take 27 to 36 air samples to get a feel of a building. So that being said, a positive air sample that shows elevations in mold spores does indicate that they are there. The problem is that they're not always aerosolizing. That's where, they said that 27 to 36 samples, which nobody's going to do. That would be insanely expensive. But the point is that a negative air test does not reassure you that a building is fine. If somebody sees visible mold, I would recommend a direct sample, like a tape lift or something, directly on the visible mold. ERMI type tests are interesting, and they primarily provide a history of the building because the goal is to collect dust in hidden places. That's kind of the goal of an ERMI. So those types of tests I found the most confusing and potentially misleading. For example, I had a college student age kid who was doing great. He had moved from one environment and was in a different environment and somehow chose to do an ERMI test. And he's a student, he has books and stuff, and that's not great. I'm sure there was some contamination, but it was in direct contrast to what was happening clinically. So, I also know that what's being picked up on an ERMI is not necessarily what's truly active in the environment that you're breathing. So yes, it would be good to clean behind the cabinets and the refrigerator and all that. And it's not good, to find mold on an ERMI sample, but it also doesn't necessarily represent what's going on in the moment in the building. And so I think those are the three main tests, and they can be useful, especially if an air sample finds something, because it's guaranteed there. But if it misses it, you need to do another 35 samples according to the World Health Organization to really be sure it's not there. So there are limitations. Really, though, if people need to prove something is there, the tests are useful. However, I am generally much more interested in people resolving the problem. So identifying the source of the moisture and having it safely remediated under containment. Every water damage item needs to be removed and replaced under containment so it doesn't contaminate the rest of the house. And so if your resources are limited and there's an issue, I'm much more interested in what is physically seen, whether it's by an inspector who can access certain areas or even just, to the naked eye, because if that happened, it's got to be addressed. Life happens, things leak, things go wrong, but just wiping them down is not going to solve anything. And in a way, you're pouring more water on it. So anyway, testing can be useful. I recommend people, when they can see a water damaged area, fix it. And if you're going to test it, test the actual sample, once it's been safely removed to get an idea. So that's kind of my take on testing.
Okay. Do you see, are there any common kind of huge faux pas or mistakes that you see people making or remediators making that might be helpful to know for our audience to know about, before they go and make the same mistake that could jeopardize their project?
Yeah. People haven't done well with ozonating their homes. It sounds like everybody wants a quick and easy way to fix this problem. I understand it, but the ozone treating homes has made things worse for people. That I can say clinically. I have some theories about it, but that hasn't been helpful. I send patients an article done in 2012 in Scandinavia about remediation options. They deliberately contaminated wood and building materials with aspergillus and stachybotrys and tried to address them with ammonia, UV light, bleach, ozone, heating, hydrogen peroxide. Nothing worked. Nothing destroys mycotoxins. And I use that article to point out to people that whatever magic formula somebody's saying they can just wipe down with, it might be fine to wipe down after you physically removed and replaced the items. But to believe that is that you've resolved the problem by wiping down or using a sprayer or a candle is it's not believable to me, and it doesn't turn out to be adequate. If it's done in addition to properly addressing the situation, it might be fine. Physically cleaning and removing that's never a bad idea, as long as it's done under containment, where you're not, like you described with your wife, where you're not aerosolizing everything. It's okay to wipe down and clean. It's good.
Yeah.
Like a wet wipe, not to where you're not aerosolizing.
Yeah. Microfiber with water.
Yeah.
Do you find that there are certain things, when people are getting out of mold, let's say they're leaving their house, and they're not sure what to leave behind and what to take, are there certain things that you would say absolutely don't take it with you when you leave?
Yeah. Paper really is not remediable. Paper is going to be the biggest problem. I would not bring any paper if there are documents that need to be retained. I would seal them in a box and have them somewhere else. Soft materials are the next worst. Bedding, anything in the bedroom, pillows, sheets, the mattress, sadly, I would really try and make a fresh start there. You really want your bedroom healthy, bedroom sanctuary concept. So I wouldn't want anything contaminated in the bedroom. In fact, bedrooms shouldn't have too much in general. It's just easier to have them, be clean and healthy. Soft materials that aren't in the bedroom, like clothes and couches. Clothes can be problematic, especially shirts, because they're just so close to where you're breathing. So if people are really trying to make their best effort at this, I would not bring clothing. I would not bring an upholstered piece of furniture. Those are going to be the harder ones to address. I generally ask people, I tell them that I have not had patients regret bringing too little to their new environment. I've had plenty regret bringing too much. If you bring a little bit at a time, it also becomes clearer later if you choose to introduce a single item. And I'm not sure if I shared this online, but during our experience, we were out of the moldy house. We brought in a single dresser that the remediator swore up and down had been completely cleaned. And that the next morning I had night sweats. I was totally out of it. And our daughter spiked 104.5 fever. She was 6. And because we had brought in one single item, it was very, very clear. We isolated it and then got rid of it. And she was good the next day. I was good the next day. It really is a lot easier if you don't bring too much at a time. Because if you bring a lot, you're probably gonna still feel off. And if the goal is to get your health back as quickly as possible, I would really urge people to bring as little as possible. I don't advise people what to actually do with their stuff. I just want it out of their living and breathing environment, because in the future, some things may be tolerable. So I'm not going to tell someone, exactly what to do. A lot of people just choose to get rid of things. That's what we did. But again, different personalities, different situations, people have to work through this, the way that works for them. But if they want my advice, it will be much more clear and effective if you don't bring stuff with you.
Yeah, that makes sense, because if you don't recover, you always just have to wonder, are you contaminating your new environment? So, yeah.
And I'll take an opportunity to say, when people first move, shortly after, they often have a flare-up of symptoms, and that will happen in healthy environments or unhealthy. But in healthy environments, that has a lot to do with when people move, there's a lot of going through aerosolizing things. There's also a lot of stress. There's also a lot of pressure on the new place you moved to, right? Because you had to flee an unhealthy environment. So you're stressed about it. So I do encourage people not to take those initial symptoms too seriously. Like, don't put too much meaning on them. Talk to your physician. I'll talk with people, and it will become clear if the new environment is unhealthy. If it's just some flare-ups and ups and downs, don't make any big decisions, that the place isn't good for you yet. Just kind of, give that a little bit of time. But I could almost predict shortly after a move, people will have symptoms and be very concerned about it, right? Because they just, rearrange their whole life. And I would give it some time. Things can be addressed, resolved, and, it may not reflect on the new environment at all.
What time frame would you typically say give? Is it a 3-week, 4-week, 5-week? What do you see?
Most, yeah. I have not thought of it in terms of time frame. I try to encourage people to talk to me so that we can talk it through and get a feel for what's happening, what could be contributing, and then sure, I would say if the environment's generally healthy, those types of initial symptoms would resolve within a couple months. Again, with the overall trend being improvement. The other thing I'll mention is reactions that people can have to the tiniest amount of exposure can be extreme because the immune system has become very hyperreactive and it can do very dramatic things. And how dramatic the reaction is, as long as it's not an anaphylactic reaction where, you're having breathing problems, but like the extreme neurologic reactions and, just really extreme things happen. They can often start after you're out of the environment because, there's the concept that when you're in it, it's masked. And then when you're out of it, you're kind of all sick all the time when you're in an unhealthy environment. And then when you get out, you're unmasked. So your body will start to respond to things. And I have used the peanut analogy that, we all know somebody could die from a peanut allergy if someone was eating a sandwich across the room. The mold response is not a type 1 reaction that causes anaphylaxis, but it is the same concept. So because someone's reacting extremely does not mean that there was an extreme amount of exposure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's immune system. Yeah. So that's also, I try to talk people through that, that just that your body's gonna, it's your immune system is doing what we want it to do. It just has become too vigilant because it was exposed for a while and it had to protect you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've actually, one of my theories is what I call the theory of angry fat, which is, mycotoxins are fat soluble. Typically, the body sequesters them into fat cells as a means to protect the person who's being chronically exposed. And once you get out, that stuff starts mobilizing out and it's hitting your bloodstream, and then it's got to sweat out, poop out, or pee out, and that can create a symptom flare, a whirlwind of them. And so I always just try to caution people about that as well.
People do a lot better if you give them an idea what to expect and you kind of coach them, through the process. I think all of us can tolerate a lot more if we have some understanding of what's happening and that it's part of a process. So I think providers who can kind of support and coach people through those really scary times when their body is acting in ways, they've never experienced before. And also, when someone's been sick for a while, their body has kind of gotten used to it. It is far from ideal. But when you try and shift them out of that state, then things start happening, and that can be frightening. When your body's already glitched on you and you're uncomfortable, kind of insecure about, what's going to happen next. It's harder to tolerate, the whole process. So when you start to do a treatment, or, you mentioned sweating, sauna, anything that shifts things can trigger an alarm, even though it's a process to getting to where they would like to be. It's just that getting through that, I think, is also a key time for having a good, close relationship with your provider, because I get it. It's really hard when your body's acting in ways you can't understand and that are severe. So, but you can't always get completely better without things happening. Symptoms happen, and improving the sort of resilience for that process, I think, is also a big goal of mine, and hopefully other providers.
So speaking of that, what would you do with somebody to help improve their resilience? Are there treatment strategies, nutritional strategies, lifestyle strategies, et cetera, that you have found in your practice to be extremely helpful?
So when I was speaking of the resilience side of it, I was thinking more on the emotional tolerance, or I guess what I try and do with patients is encourage them to approach everything calmly and confidently. And if a problem happens, to just take it with their body, with their home, to just kind of reconnect the competent side of their brain, because the experience of being sick from a moldy house totally pulls the rug out from you, and you don't trust your body anymore. And there's the physical resilience side of it. Nutritional, glutathione, magnesium, B-vitamin, everything restored to its optimal state. But I'm thinking more of the trauma response side of this. No matter who you are, when your home is suddenly not safe, that rattles your sense of safety. It just does. You don't know what next is going to be a problem. And that does lead to people who go from place to place to place to place. And I understand that. I get it. And because they are so reactive, that a new place is okay briefly, and then they sensitize to that. But that also keeps you in a survival state, a fight or flight state, not a healing state. And yes, you need to be in a healthy environment. Yes, it's possible the place you move to is not healthy, but talk about it, be calm, make a decision, try and ramp down the rapid fleeing response. You can still flee if that's what makes sense. Just do it calmly and confidently, because you just cannot heal if our body that is strictly just keeping us alive when you're in a constant state of what's next. It's extremely hard. So I guess I try and support and teach approaches to handling the glitches that are going to come up along the way, and trying to ramp down what I'm really good at, used to be good at myself, and we all can do, is full freak out mode. It's what our brains do. The first thing, if there's anything off, we go into full freak out. That's what humans do. And there are a few select situations where that benefits us if we have to run away from a situation, but mostly that keeps us in a state. We're not using our best judgment. We're not thinking. We're not healing. We're not, so I guess when I bring up the trauma side of it, what happened in the home just happened. It happened. It was, it was extremely difficult. However, that happened. You learned from it. Now you're smarter and more capable of handling situations in the future. And that's what I want to encourage in my patients or anybody to just, it's just another problem. You approach it like a problem, not, the world's going to end if you have another reaction, because you will have another reaction. It's a guarantee. So,
Yeah. I know a lot of people have kind of a mold PTSD, and so there's that mold radar that goes off and kicks their sympathetic system, back into overdrive, and then healing and digestion and bowel function and sleep, everything starts to become affected as a result of that chemical imbalance or shift in the nervous system. So do you recommend things like meditation, prayer? What types of strategies have you? I mean, I know it's different for different people, but are there certain ones you've seen work better than others for kind of reactivating the parasympathetic function?
Yeah, it is different for different people. I have a high number of patients who have had pre-existing trauma situations that may or may not have been addressed before they had their exposure. But if there's any indication, I will refer to trauma therapy, because I think it just all intertwines. It's, your home as a safe place is, if you don't have that, it's very disorienting. And so trauma type work, meditation, absolutely. Some sort of movement as tolerated. Our body, our venous and lymphatic system do not have pumps. They do not work. They work on one-way valves. They do not work as well if there's no movement at all. So not that I would ask anybody to exercise past their tolerance at the given time, but massaging or just anything that keeps things moving, I think is helpful. Meditations are good if you can get yourself into that headspace. Sometimes the situation is just so amped up that that's not really reasonable. Going outside, touching the ground, being, just things like that are all helpful. But to really reset, a person has to feel safe, which is the same as trauma work. And, you have to feel safe for your body to heal. And so resetting that is definitely something that I found is a lot bigger part of my practice than I might have thought it would be when I started.
Yeah, the psychology is so important.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What types of, so for our doctors who are listening, you kind of found your way, right? And inadvertently you were sick. You went to every kind of expert specialist, had every kind of test done, and then it just so happened that you were fortunate enough to find some a mold smudge that led you down the right path. What message would you have for doctors? Let's say doctors who are looking to learn more about this. Are there postgraduate programs? Are there groups where they could, commingle and go and get information so that they could become better at helping people identify when mold illness is at stake?
Yeah. There are various groups that have educational programs. In the past, I had coordinated and taught courses in mold illness that are available through the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. I believe other organizations also, would have some modules and courses. I do think anyway, I was just going to talk about the courses at AAM, at least the ones that I had been part of, I think give a decent overview for people. I'm not sure if other groups have something like that. So that's one option.
Okay.
And yeah, go ahead.
The environmental medicine, the Academy of Environmental Medicine then would be, do they still use your coursework?
I had a physician patient recently who said that he had used it, had purchased it and went through it. So I am not with the group currently, so I don't know exactly what they're doing.
Okay.
But they've had it available. And what I don't know how to say this. People getting information from each other online is invaluable. It can be very, very useful. And also, it can really stress people out. It's both, it can be helpful, but what many of my patients have said is, once they got better, they leave the online groups, which should be, clear that you spend the time doing things when you are having big problems, and when you get better, you leave. So I think that people from some of those groups can get a bit of a doom and gloom outlook, understanding that not everybody gets better, and the people who they're hearing from are not representative of the entirety of patients who have been sick from mold. The vast majority are out there living their lives. So, again, I think getting information online, we all use it, it's great, but you have a little bit of perspective. If something is, getting you very alarmed, I would check in with your healthcare provider just to, get a feedback, because a lot of things, I hate to see patients super alarmed or of the mindset that they have something genetically or otherwise that will prevent them from getting better, because that is not true. So that would be my reservation there. I wish I could give you more solid educational referrals right now. I just know there's been some other groups that have also started teaching mold. I haven't reviewed their material, so I don't know for sure. I know what I taught, and I stand by that. So that's what you can get.
So cautionary tale to folks watching: enter mold discussion groups with a kind of a hint of caution to not maybe take everything that you hear or read as law of your personal story outcome. Don't let it stress you out. If it's stressing you out, make your exit strategy. Get with a good mold literate practitioner and get the right kind of guidance versus the groupthink, possible scare tactics that sometimes can go on in those groups. Not that those groups are all bad. So
no, exactly.
Yeah.
Just have your know what environment you're getting into, and before you go there, put it in perspective, and understand that take, just like any online resource, take it for what it can give you, and have an awareness that there could just have a filter and understand people's situations are different, and it's not necessarily what your life's going to be like. I really am not a fan of dreaded genotype type concepts, and I don't want to go into that scientifically, but there's no evidence for it, but it holds a very strong emotional connection to people, and nothing in the body is dependent on one gene. It's just not that simple. So yes, people's genetics do affect how they react. I would say people who are more prone to autoimmune issues, seem to have more of a reaction. but to narrow it down to a single gene and then decide, your future based on that is not useful or accurate.
Well, and I agree with you. I think it could create more fear. I don't know. My philosophy is genes are a gift from God, not a curse.
I like that. Yeah.
And if we understand it from that premise, then it's not necessarily what our genes are, but it's what we do with them that is going to play the bigger interaction with how we feel and how we recover.
Yeah. And everything, CDC, virtually all human illness is an interaction of genes and the environment. And, we can control some things, and genes are complicated and interactive and not, singularly determinative of, how you're going to do with mold exposure or how your recovery is going to be.
Agreed. So what message of hope can you give to people watching this who are maybe in the darkest depths of mold illness?
Yes. You can get your life back, even though that seems unbelievable with how you feel right now. This medical condition is one that can completely resolve. And the way you're feeling at your sickest will be completely foreign to you in the future. And for me, that's kind of unbelievable because I was there. I was, I couldn't get out of bed to pick up my kid from school some days. And, my parents had to help. Or I would see people walking on the street just normal. Because I used to be and am very physically active, but at that point I couldn't do anything, and I'd see someone, I was like, I wish I could just walk around. And you don't know why, but you know how absolutely terrible you feel. And it is inconceivable at that point that you can feel as good or better than you did before, but you can. And the mold doctor I saw was Dr. Erica Elliott, and she used those words for me. She's said, I expect you to be as good or better. And when I heard better, it's like, what? What do you mean better? I was great. But actually I wasn't. I was kind of accommodating different things, and, things were starting to happen. And going through an experience like this taught me so much that has improved my overall health and well-being that I would have never bothered with. I would have just kept doing my busy life, taking ibuprofen, doing this, getting through. And so, yeah, you really can't, you as good or realistically better than you did before. And the beauty of that is that's not true of all illnesses. So as devastating as this experience can be, and as long as it can take to get your life back and all of that, you absolutely can. And I fully expect you to feel better than you had in a really long time, at least at your baseline, if not better.
Fantastic. Is there any place, do you have a blog or a website that we could direct people to learn more about what you do in your work and how to recover from mold?
I have a website, JanetteHopeMD.com. It has, some of the references and, a few of the talks that people have put online that I've given in the past. And that would be a place to start. I'm currently not writing a blog. If I do, I will let you know. But I have the information from before, and if they want to make an appointment, they can reach out through the website also, just to get more information about their, if they feel like they need to check in.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm happy. I am available.
Yeah, I mean, I found your work, I'm knee deep in mold because of what happened to my family. My family
Yeah,
was sick.
similar story, huh? Yeah.
And in my practice, we've always taken care of folks with mold, but never had to experience it. And once we had to experience it, it changes the way your lens, your view is. And I found your work extremely beneficial and helpful. And I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time, because I know that the level of scientific analysis and study that you've done based on the papers that I've read that you've produced is phenomenal. It's phenomenal and very well done and very articulate. And I just appreciate doctors like yourself who take the time, even having a busy practice in life, to make sure that that knowledge is being paid forward. So thank you very much.
I could say the same to you. Thanks for getting this out there. I think the more people who can see and hear that there could be an explanation for what's going on with them, and there could be hope that they can get out the other side. I think that's really useful to get out there.
Well, Dr. Hope, I really appreciate you taking time to spend with me today and share your knowledge and wisdom. And look forward to seeing more of your work in the future, and look forward to connecting more.
That sounds great. It was great to meet you, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks so much, and have a fantastic weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Dr. Osborne Zone. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe for more content like this, and make sure you come back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time and Thursday at noon 30 for more episodes.